Hi everybody, back by popular demand, we've got a video here from Fran, who is looking at A Level History Coursework, focusing on the primary source aspect, which is Objective 2. Right, enjoy.
Hello, Fran here. This video is going to go over how to analyse a primary source for your coursework. This is Assessment Objective 2 on your coursework, and this video will outline how the mark scheme works and the structure you would need to follow in order to give yourself the best chance of getting high marks on that mark scheme. So before I go through techniques for writing your primary source analysis as part of Assessment Objective 2, I'm just going to go over the mark scheme for this section of your coursework and what we as markers and ultimately the moderator will be looking for when reading your response. On this slide then is the mark scheme we use to give your primary sources a mark out of 10. You are analysed against 3 different criteria. The first one is called the amount of sources, and what we are looking for is for you to analyse 3 primary sources that are different in type. By different in type, we just mean that you are not analysing 3 newspaper articles. So we want you to choose a variety of different primary sources. So it could be a newspaper article, a speech and a law. So that's what we mean by type. The bit of the mark scheme I really want to draw your attention to is the difference between level 1 and 2. Level 1 says 1 source, level 2 says 3 sources. And what that means is that if you analyse 1 or 2 primary sources, you cannot get above level 1, which is 2 marks out of 10. No matter how strong your analysis is, no matter how compelling your information is about that source, if there's only 2 there and there's not 3, you are only getting 2 out of 10. So you need to really commit yourself to knowing the fact that you have got to analyse 3 primary sources. In terms of the second row then, we are looking at the value, how sophisticated are your comments on value, how well backed up are they by own knowledge about the topic and about the primary source itself. And again, that works on a scale, but I will be talking about value a lot more in this video. The final row is judgment, and you'll see it jumps straight to level 4. And by judgment, we mean your conclusion on how valuable the primary source is overall. And again, this video is going to look at what makes a strong conclusion in relation to determining the value of a primary source. Before we start looking at paragraphs and structure, I just want to make sure that everybody is clear on what we mean by the term value and what we mean by limitations in relation to value. On the screen then is a question you can keep asking yourself when you are analysing a primary source for value. And that question is, how much can we learn about the anti-Semitism of German people from this source? It's a question that you, again, can apply to any element of the source you are analysing, whether it be the provenance, the term, the argument. But in a nutshell, this is what you need to be asking yourself at any given point when analysing a primary source for your coursework. If value is something you struggle with, it's something that you struggle to kind of pinpoint in terms of what to write, I would recommend almost pausing the video on this slide so that you can just keep asking yourself this question of how much can we learn? Is this source helping us understand about the topic, or are there elements of this source that are kind of preventing us from learning the full picture? So my advice at this point would be, if you find yourself struggling with analysing value, pop this video back up to this area of the video and click pause. Now that I've gone over value and limitations as concepts, I'm going to run through the paragraphs that we advise you to write in order to effectively analyse a primary source. And the first paragraph we're going to look at is provenance. And now provenance is made up of different elements, and so the following few slides are going to explain what provenance is, but just remember these would all be in a single paragraph. They would not be separated out. So one area of provenance that you can analyse is the author who wrote or spoke the primary source you're analysing. On this slide are some potential people you could come across, broadly speaking, in terms of key Nazi figures, someone specific to an event you're looking at, or it could be somebody you have never heard of. The first thing you're going to need to do is conduct extra research on the person who has appeared in your primary source. So if it's a key Nazi figure, so if it was Goebbels, you would need to go and do some research on Goebbels so that you've got a better impression of who he is in relation to the time period he writes in, and whether he is likely to represent the views of German people. So once you've done that extra research, you will find yourself in a better position to make a call. Is the person who has written or spoken your primary source going to help you understand about German views and German anti-Semitism, or are they perhaps going to hinder your understanding? Because the topic of our coursework is German people, no individual is going to give you everybody's viewpoint. So what your task here is to look at whose viewpoint is being represented, and whose viewpoint, importantly, is not being represented. And when you can figure that out, you are going to be in a much better position to talk about value and limitations. Another element of provenance is audience, and two areas I would consider looking at when analysing provenance is how large is the audience, in particular how many German people accessed this primary source at the time, and then from that you could also look at the importance of the audience. Is the group of people who interact with the source, are they particularly relevant to the coursework and what you are looking at? And again, once you know the answers to those two questions, it will probably involve some further research in order to get those answers. You can start making informed decisions about whether the source is valuable or limited. Date is an element of provenance you can talk about quite easily in any primary source you get. And what you're trying to do is work out where the primary source fits into a broader narrative. No primary source is going to give you insight into a 100-year period. That's impossible. So what you're looking at is where does this source fit in the course? Where does it fit perhaps in relation to an event you're looking at? So if you were, more broadly speaking, looking at Kristallnacht and you in your coursework analysed a primary source on Kristallnacht, what you might do is look at the date in relation to Kristallnacht rather than your 100 years. So you might look at your primary source and ask yourself, is it before the event happened? Was it put together in the middle of the event? Or was it put together after the event? And if the answer is after the event, you want to see how far after the event that source was put together, because that is going to give you an indication as to why the author writes or speaks the way that they do. If somebody is writing after an event, they will have hindsight, which means they know what happened beforehand, whereas a person writing before an event doesn't know what's going to happen. Again, you're going to need to do extra research to find out where the timing of the source fits in relation to the event, so that you can again make these judgments that are backed up and what we call substantiated in terms of whether the date makes a source valuable or limited in terms of learning about German people and their anti-Semitism. Type, so the type of source you can look at, whether it's a piece of literature, whether it's a speech, whether it's a law. And I would recommend, I think it's easier to talk about the type of source when you link it into the purpose, which is this next slide. So if you know the purpose of the source, again, you can talk about value. Is the author trying to persuade people? That could actually be valuable. It could tell you what German people are thinking if somebody else is trying to persuade them to a different point of view. Is it to instruct? Is it to inform? Again, you'll need to do extra research. But if you know the motivation of the author, that can start giving you insight into German opinion, German thoughts. You just, again, need to suss out where do German people's attitudes fit in relation to the source's purpose. So that would all be one paragraph. In terms of word count, you will not be able to analyse all areas of provenance. I would recommend picking out 3 to analyse. So for example, you might do the author, the date and the purpose. And from there, when we've got a word count, we can start looking at adding extra elements of provenance in, or perhaps taking out if the word count is too high. So the second paragraph is turn. And by turn, we mean the mood. So what is the mood in the source? On this slide then are some words that you could use to describe an author's turn. However, this is not a comprehensive list. There are many more words you could use to describe turn. And at the bottom of this slide is a web link that you can use to help find words to describe turn. A lot of students I talk to just struggle to find a word to summarise what the mood is. So it could be quite formal if it was a law, could be quite impartial if you get a source where you don't feel like there's a really strong point of view coming across, or a side's not being taken almost. It might be impartial, could be critical. So those words are just to give you an indication as to what or how mood can be described. When it comes to value, what we are looking at is how many people felt that way. So again, we're going to need to do research and find knowledge and really try to understand whether the turn in that source is reflective of the author as an individual or reflective of a broader audience. And that's going to start telling you whether it's valuable or not. If you get a turn that only represents the author and nobody else, that's going to be quite a limitation of the source. Whereas if the mood you can kind of see through further research is how a lot of other people felt, then it might become more valuable. This would be one paragraph, by the way. The final paragraph before the conclusion is the argument. In class, when we study America, we get you to do 2 paragraphs on argument, but because of the word count for coursework, we're going to ask for 1 paragraph only, please. So by argument, we just mean what point is the author making? What is the author saying about the topic you are looking at? So what is the author saying about Kristallnacht, or what is the author saying about the Nuremberg laws? What point is he trying to get across to his or her audience? In terms of assessing value, what we're trying to judge is how true is that point? And if it's an opinion, again, it might start linking into how many people shared that viewpoint. So again, as with every other paragraph I've been saying on all of these slides, you are going to need to do more research to try and gauge what the author's saying, whether that is what happened, whether it's not what happened, maybe elements of the event have maybe been skewed. It's easy to fall into quite a simplistic approach to analysis at this point, because some people will go, if it's telling the truth, it's valuable, if it's lying, it's limited. Which to a degree is an approach you can take, but if you're wanting to get higher marks, if a source is lying, what is great to do at this point is to look at why. Why is this source not matching up against what you know about the event? And if you can work out the why, could be a motive, could be an ulterior motive, then that can have value. It would completely depend on the source, and again, it would rely on you having done some in-depth research. But just as a warning, don't always assume that an inaccuracy should be written off as a limitation, because with further research you can get some really high quality analysis on people's motivations and purpose for writing. There is a conclusion for primary sources. As we saw at the beginning, there is a row of the mark scheme where you get judged on your judgment. So I'm going to just go over finally how to form a judgment. If you have me in lesson, you'll have seen this analogy a few times, so I apologise. The best way of explaining a conclusion, in my opinion, in relation to value and limitations, is to imagine you've got 2 boxes on like a weighing scale. Now, no primary source in terms of overall value is going to be completely one way or completely the other way. So if you imagine you put all the valuable points in one box and all the limitations in the second box, you are never going to get a situation where the scales completely tip one way or another. And that's because no source is completely valuable, but also no source has complete limitations, because if it was completely limited, we just wouldn't use it. So what we're trying to look at is, if we put all of our valuable points in one box and all of our limitations in a second box and pop it on a weighing scale, which way is it going to lean and how far is it going to lean in that direction? And that is kind of the visual image I would try and get in your head of how valuable it is overall. So if you imagined you had a primary source where there were a lot more points of value, and you imagine that your weighing scales tip towards the value side, then your conclusion would be that the primary source is mostly valuable to your investigation. Equally, if you had more points of limitation and it tipped in that direction quite a lot, you would say the source overall is mostly limited to your investigation. If you feel like you've got a fairly even spread on each side, you've got kind of same number of points that you think are of equal weight in each box, you might say overall the source is quite balanced in its value and limitations. But you would need to explain that. And what the conclusion is wanting you to do is to summarise what have you put in that value box and what have you put in that limitations box in order to come to that judgment. So again, you're kind of taking a step back and bringing the entire primary source together now in order to come to a judgment. That then is the end of my video on how to analyse a primary source. My advice would be to keep playing this video every time you do a primary source, so for all three, and keep pausing it at the sections you find more difficult. If you are struggling, as always, please email your class teacher and they will try to help you as much as they can within the boundaries we've got. But thank you for listening and I'll see you soon.
Huge thank you to Fran for that excellent video telling you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to hit objective 02 in A Level coursework. So that should be a brilliant next part of your jigsaw in making that final piece of coursework and making it fully polished and getting the best possible marks. If this has been helpful for you, please look at the other videos in the coursework section, have a look at the other videos across the channel, and if you haven't done already, please subscribe, leave comments to get further help, and like it if it has been useful. Thank you very much for watching, and again a huge thank you to Fran for that video.